is not just the fossils, although I have several fossils up here, but also the rocks themselves. And to better understand that and to have a good understanding of that, we have to understand how those rocks got there. There's basically two views that vie for, really the simple term, that vie for belief as truth. One is the evolutionary view that says the earth has been here for billions of years, and the rocks that we see and the layers of rocks that we see and things like Grand Canyon and those kind of things happened over millions and millions of years, and the dinosaurs and the other animals that we see in the fossil record, they tell us a story about how things evolved from very simple things to very complex things and all of that. That's one story, all right? The other story is the one that we find in Scripture that tells us God created everything roughly around 6,000 years ago, that there was a worldwide flood 1,656 years after that creation, and that flood was so devastating that it destroyed virtually all life on the earth except for that was in the ark and then the animals in the oceans that didn't breathe air. And it was that flood event, all of the destruction that was related to that flood, that laid down those rock layers that we see today. And because of those rock layers, we find animals and plants and all kinds of things in those rock layers. And so that's why I brought this stuff today. Over here, I'll just tell you real quickly, all of this over here are books and DVDs that relate to the rocks, okay? The history and all of the things you find there. The books go from the most technical to the least technical, okay? So if you're up here and you got a question about one of the books, is this a good book for this or whatever, I'll be glad to answer the questions after the service. There's also a whole slew of DVDs up here. They're not in any particular order. They're just up here, but they're all about the rocks. When I was trying to put together what to show tonight, the biggest problem I had was I had 6 different DVDs that I wanted to show. And the reason was there's bits and pieces in all 6 of them that I wish they would have put into one video. And so I ended up having to pick 2 to do that. And for tonight, and it actually comes from this series here called Uncovering the Truth About Dinosaurs. This is from ICR, so we're going to watch the 3rd and the 4th episodes in this series tonight, and then next week we'll watch the 2nd one, all right, and we'll tie all the pieces together. But all of the DVDs are great. Some of them are fantastic. It's like I said, I really wanted to show about 6 of them. But I think I can cover what we need to cover in 2. Now, what you're going to hear as we watch this tonight, and so I'll give you a little bit of a heads up, is that, fossils are animals and plants where the bones and the skin tissue and all of those things have been replaced by minerals as a result of basically minerals in water and mud. What does that kind of sound like? And so you'll see all of that. But what has happened in the last 10 to 15 years is absolutely phenomenal. According to evolution, the last of the dinosaurs lived about 65 million years ago. Now, that's the evolutionary time frame. 65 million years ago. Back a few years ago, a scientist by the name of Mary Schweitzer, her assistant, made a mistake. And it really was a mistake from their view. I think it was God. But from their view, it was definitely a mistake. They had taken part of a T-Rex bone, and they were cleaning off material off of that bone, and they had placed it in a cleaning fluid that had some mild acid and some other stuff on it. Well, the assistant forgot to get it out of the cleaning fluid. They went home. They come back whenever the next time they came back was, and the bone wasn't there anymore. But instead, what was there was something they never in literally a million years would have ever thought to find. And that was soft tissue from the inside of the bone. Now, you can't have soft tissue over 65 million years. Now, Mary Schweitzer took a beating. Now, she's an avowed evolutionist, and she took a beating because she published this. And she knew it was going to happen. So she actually ran the different series of tests. Once they found it, she began to run test after test. She ran it 3 different ways, sent it to 3 different laboratories, and all 3 laboratories came back with the same information. This is soft tissue. Well, that kicked off the stories can go on and on and on. As of the last count I heard, and that was dated about mid of 2018, there have been 75 papers published in relation to finding soft tissue in dinosaurs now. Because once they realized they could find it, other people were looking for it. Now, they don't accept that the Bible's right. They're trying to figure out how in the world can soft tissue last for millions and millions of years. But they're still doing the testing and they're finding a lot. Well, part of the ones that have been doing that is the Creation Research Society. And they had they actually set off what they call the iDino Project. Okay? And this book is a magazine, 2015. This is their quarterly magazine. And in 2015, they published an update on what they call the iDino Project. And it was them looking for and looking at the literature and trying to uncover, what else has soft tissue. They actually went to Hell's Creek Formation in Montana, found one of the longest T-Rex bones, or T-Rex horns ever, about 4.5 foot long. They took it back to the lab, ran the tests on it, and not only did they find blood vessels, like Schweitzer found, but I've seen video of this, and the video I'm showing unfortunately doesn't show this, but one of the videos I did have, it's like I said, I'd love to mix and match these videos. But they actually show it under a microscope, and they take 2 pair of tweezers and they pull it apart, and it snaps back like a rubber band. It's tissue that literally is that pliable. Okay? Again, and it was found in a T-Rex bone, or not in a T-Rex, but this was a Triceratops horn. Okay? Up here, I've got all kinds of stuff. I just brought them over here so you can see different kinds of fossils. But this right here, this big piece, is actually part of a Triceratops frill. You know the Triceratops got the big horns on its head and then the big thing around its neck, like a collar? This is part of that collar. This is a piece of Triceratops horn. And it happens to be from the same Hells Creek, Montana area that they found the one they did the testing on. You have no idea how bad I would like to send this to CRS and see if there's anything in there. But I also like my horn. And so since they've already found it, I'm just going to think that it might be in there and be happy with it. Because they are not getting this now. But I've got a lot of stuff up here. This little black one, and I'll just tell you all these things. You can come up and look at it later. But on this black piece, this is actually a piece of coal, and petrified coal. And in this, you can actually see such exquisite detail that you can see the petals on flowers and the stem and the little leaves off the flowers. You can see ferns. If you walk around to the back side of it, you can see sheets of wood where an entire forest was just leveled underwater. And it's awesome. I mean, this is one of the prides of my collection is that little piece right there. I love it because it's so vivid. You can see every little detail of the flowers. These 2 pieces are dinosaur bone. By the way, both of these little pieces of dinosaur bone are radioactive. Now, when I say radioactive, I'm saying slightly above background, okay? The interesting thing about most dinosaur bones is that many of them actually are slightly radioactive. You don't usually hear that. From a creationist perspective, now from an evolutionary perspective, it's just they've been in the ground so long they've absorbed it, okay? From a creation perspective, they've not been in the ground that long, but there's another reason why it's radioactive, and it does tie to the flood. One of these days we'll talk about that. So anyway, but there's a couple pieces of bone and a piece of fossilized dinosaur skin. This is off of a small dinosaur because you see it's got the little ridges from its skin and all kinds of cool stuff. That's why I bought this one. This is actually a squished dinosaur egg. Kind of looks like a muffin because of the way they cut it out. But this is actually a squished egg, dinosaur egg. And then here are little pieces of shell, just individual little pieces of shell. These, on top of this big piece of gray stuff, are different kinds of trilobites. Trilobites are one of my favorite critters just because they're so unique looking. And so I've got several different trilobite fossils. But what it's setting on is actually a slab that's got trilobite tracks on it, which is, to me, is even cooler. I'd looked for trilobite tracks for years and finally found some back about 1.5 years ago. That's a trilobite track. This is actually a dinosaur track, a 3-toed dinosaur. So you can come up and take a look at that. I've got a couple of different piles of fish that were all killed at the same time, obviously, and these all come from the same formation. And then I've also got some seashells that were all killed at the same place. And then this is another one of the prides of my collection. This is an intact, complete mesosaur. He's about 18 inches long, 15 to 18 inches long, and it's in perfect detail. You can see everything. So you can come up and take a look at all of those. Like I said, the resources are all over there. Here in the middle are all the resources or a lot of the resources I've got related to the ark itself. Now, we're not going to get into a big study on the ark, but I just want to show you that there's stuff out there. So you can come up here and take a look at all of this kind of stuff, and after the service, and if you've got any questions about the books or the fossils or whatever, I'll be glad to answer them. But what we're going to watch tonight is the flood, what the flood did, and then the record of the dinosaurs, and they'll talk about the soft tissue stuff in a little bit more detail than what I just did, all right? So we're going to start with 3. So, brother, if you don't care to go ahead and crank us up, we'll get going.
Many strange creatures have walked this world of ours. Some have left it forever. Why did the great dinosaurs vanish? Was it a mass extinction? Were they wiped out by an asteroid? Or was it something else? Can science tell us what happened to them? Will we find our answers in the Bible? In this series, we'll look to both science and the Bible to help bring dinosaurs back to life, to find some answers to the many questions they have left us. Uncovering the truth about dinosaurs. Dinosaurs and the Flood. A French naturalist, Georges Cuvier, first came up with the idea of extinction way back in 1796. The idea was controversial at the time, but Cuvier theorized that a species could be driven extinct by catastrophic flooding. Now, he didn't say that the flood was the one from Genesis, but could it have been? Could the dinosaurs' downfall have begun with God's judgment of a wicked world? I'm Marcus Lloyd, and that's what we're going to try to find out. Imagine how the world looked when dinosaurs were around. It would have been even wetter and warmer then. And this would have been a tropical forest. You know, sometimes it's hard to even believe that dinosaurs existed. But they did, and they're gone now. A whole kind of animal vanished. What really happened to them? After the fall, when Adam and Eve sinned in the garden, death was introduced into the world. Some dinosaurs became carnivores, while others remained plant eaters, herbivores. And over the next 1,600 years or so, the world became increasingly evil, as the Bible tells us. So the Lord said, I will destroy man, whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, creeping thing and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them. God brought on a flood and spared only Noah and his family, and of course, of every living thing of all flesh, 2 of every sort. Except for those on the ark, countless dinosaurs and other animals were wiped out. Mainstream science says that mass extinction was brought on by an asteroid hitting the earth. Well, who's right? Dinosaurs are found in layers of rock creation scientists call systems. You've probably heard of the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous. These are identified by the type of fossils found in them. Dinosaurs are almost exclusively found in these 3 systems.
The different rock layers that dinosaurs are found in are assigned ages by the secular world that go back millions of years. They talk about the Cretaceous period, the Jurassic period, the Triassic period. As creationists, we like to use the word systems because we don't believe there are actually periods of time. These are all part of the flood record.
So each individual layer is huge, catastrophic, fast deposited, and they're all evidence of having been buried in water.
Now, in something like the Triceratops behind me, it's got an interesting story to tell because the skull was found all by itself. It's found in the Lance Formation in Wyoming. It was isolated. There were no other Triceratops parts of the body nearby, so that tells us a little bit about its history. This is not the actual place where the Triceratops died. The Triceratops died somewhere else, and the head was separated from the body, moved and transported by sediments, water and sand and mud until it came to rest. But it didn't come to rest sitting upright. Instead, it was almost upside down. It was tripoded on its horns sticking down in the frill in the back. Now, why would it be upside down? If we think of this as a skull that is being transported, the heaviest parts of the skull are the horns coming over the eye and the frill over the back of the head. And so as the water and sand mixture moves this skull, it rotates around upside down and plants itself down when the speed of the flow finally slows enough that the sediment can settle with the skull inside of it. So we've got a couple pieces of the story with a disembodied head and an upside down skull in a set of sediments far from where it started.
There's a consistent pattern of the water moving across continents, 1,000 feet or more above present sea level, a moving ocean over the continents, draping the continents with sediment from one shore to the other. Whoa, what have we got here? It seems to describe what the Bible is talking about when it talks about a global deluge in the days of Noah.
Secular scientists think that dinosaurs were eventually wiped out by 5 major extinction events, the last and most devastating event happening about 65 million years ago. Let's examine this theory.
So we've all heard the asteroid theory of dinosaur extinction. And according to this story, an asteroid or some kind of impact smashed into the Earth and created tsunamis and disrupted the crust in such a way that the dinosaurs went extinct. That's a story, and it has problems.
It's a story told by those who don't want to accept the biblical account. They say when the asteroid collided with Earth, it spread a layer of iridium over the planet. While creation scientists acknowledge the iridium, they question whether the asteroid was the source of it. Volcanic eruptions also distribute this element.
We need to pan back and see this is bigger than an asteroid. Something much bigger than an asteroid was necessary to kill all the life on the land, which is what the biblical flood did.
According to evolutionary thinking, this great catastrophic asteroid striking the Earth as being very selective, causing extinction of only the dinosaurs. And yes, of course, there were other animals that were killed, but it only seemed to kill the dinosaurs, not the extinction of the fish, not the extinction of the birds or any other groups of animals. Yes, there was a lot of death attributed to that, but only found within the Dinosauria. What is also significant is that evolutionists agree to a worldwide extinction event. We attribute it to the flood of Genesis chapter 6 through 9.
Creation scientists say that the fossil record matches what you would expect to see from a worldwide flood. The low-lying places went under first, and the mountains flooded last.
So when you look at a sedimentary layer, some insist that the layer itself, the thickness of that layer, is a time indicator. But when they say that, they're asserting that this layer was deposited over lots of time. However, if you have enough water moving fast enough, the layer can be deposited in minutes. So it's not a time indicator. You just have to have a lot of water. The problem is, so many of us are not willing to think or conceive of that much water. But the Bible says the earth was covered with water. So if you have that much water sloshing around across the whole earth, you would have the conditions set up perfectly to make thick rock layers very fast.
Even the secular geologists will acknowledge nearly all of those rocks are water deposited, and they've got within them remains of billions of dead animals. And of course, that sounds very much like a flood, and they would argue that there's been flooding in Earth history, but they would claim that it never covered the entire surface of the Earth. So they're willing to allow for large floods, if you will, what they would call marine transgressions, where the water encroached onto the land, but they claim this happened over many millions of years, and it was never a global flood that covered the Earth's entire surface.
In the biblical account, the flood occurred in the 600th year of Noah's life, on the 17th day of the second month. The windows of heaven opened up and the rains fell for 40 days and 40 nights. Giant tears opened in the seafloor and the floodwaters rose and fell. But the flood didn't cover the land all at once. It gave time for creatures to get to higher ground. But gradually, the waters prevailed. According to Genesis, it covered all the hills and drowned all but the 8 humans and many animals on the ark. Secular paleontologists tell us that we find different types of dinosaurs in different layers because the extinction events are separated by millions of years. Creation scientists attribute it to the various stages of the flood.
The flood was probably a lot bigger than we can imagine as humans. We tend to think the flood was just a local flood a lot of times. A lot of people think the flood really didn't do that much. It was tranquil, but the flood was probably more devastating than anything else on Earth. It entirely destroyed the Earth. It was God's judgment on the Earth.
Many forms of life, both human and animals, perished as the entire planet was covered with water, even covering what were then the highest hills and mountains.
Geologically, we have plates moving during the flood rapidly, meters per second. We've got the continents kind of colliding with each other, making mountain ranges. All the stuff was going on in the 1 year of the flood. The flood wasn't just rain. It didn't just rain for 40 days. The flood went on for over a year before the animals got out of the ark. So all this upheaval and all this movement and all these mountains and the Himalayas, all this stuff formed in the flood. And we see evidence of that. We see flood sediments pushed way up into these mountains. Tremendous upheaval was going on in the earth. So there were probably dinosaurs that were alive pretty close for the first 100 to 120 days of the flood, maybe even longer. But by day 150, the Bible tells us everything was completely wiped out.
Everything that lived on land and breathed air died if it was not aboard the ark. Obviously, the second main thing that happened during the Genesis flood was that there were survivors, those who were aboard the ark, and of course, sea creatures that live in the ocean anyway. They didn't need to be on the ark. 8 humans survived, and representatives of all the creative kinds, whether that represents 16,000 animals or something less than that.
One thing that the secular world and the creation scientists agree on is there were floods of some sort in the geologic record. And one of the things that we agree on are these mega sequences where the water apparently during the flood came in big, huge packages of water and then probably receded a little bit.
Now, if you have a rock unit, say near the bottom of the Grand Canyon, and then you have another rock unit near the top, obviously the one near the bottom was formed first. And so we're not going to dispute that, but that's not the same thing as saying it was formed millions of years before this other rock unit. And there are actually clues, strong clues within the rocks themselves that these rock units were formed very rapidly and catastrophically, not slowly and gradually over millions of years as the evolutionists claim.
And these clues are the fossils. Evolutionists say it takes long periods of time to make one. But is that really true? How are fossils made? You have to remember, not everything that dies becomes a fossil. In fact, fossilization is rare. Most dead plants and animals are usually eaten by scavengers or destroyed by bacteria. The things that are buried quickly in sand and mud, like in a flood or a landslide, have a better chance of becoming fossils. And animal soft tissues, that's skin and internal organs, usually rot away, even when buried, leaving only bones. As the material around a fossilized bone is cleared away by erosion, the fossil becomes exposed.
We see a pattern with dinosaur fossils. Why do they occur in some areas but not in others? And especially with the dinosaur footprints. They're along this dinosaur trackway that goes from North Texas and it swoops up on the eastern side of the Rocky Mountains all the way to Canada. The flood may help answer that, because if the floodwaters are moving in, they're wiping out the last creatures to survive. The last creatures to survive are probably the hardiest, the ones that can be hit with water, can wade in that water. At the highest elevations during the flood year, maybe these dinosaurs were wading in water, and then during the tides, for example, the water would recede a little bit, and then the dinosaurs would have a place to step foot. And they were tracking their way in the highest elevations. So during the flood, we would have had water sloshing back and forth, and we would have had the conditions that set up for preservation of trackways and preservation of trackways in just the highest areas.
But the earliest ones, the Triassic dinosaurs, are found on the fringes of what's called the Dinosaur Peninsula. Those dinosaurs are mostly all small. And then as the water went up higher, the next group of dinosaurs, the Jurassic system dinosaurs, were buried, and those include a lot of the sauropods. The sauropods, those big long necks, they were very big, but they couldn't really run, they couldn't trot away. And then later, as we go further to the north, as that peninsula is being flooded systematically kind of from south to north, we get up into Montana and Alberta and Canada, we see the huge herds of dinosaurs.
A lot of times, dinosaur fossils occur in what we call bone beds. And so these bone beds are packed with dinosaur fossils. And some of them are vast. There's one that was discovered recently in Alberta with just hundreds of Centrosaurus dinosaurs in a 1 by 1 square mile area. How did they get there? Floodwaters from a massive, catastrophic flooding event could bring in the mud that would bury this herd of Centrosaurs.
This is generally described as a river deposit. If it were truly a river deposit, you wouldn't be able to trace these beds for long distances. But we've been able to trace some of these beds over quite an extensive area. So this is an indication that these sediments are being deposited under deeper water. And that's a major change in our view of how the lands got deposited.
So the vast scale of carnage that we see in the rock layers indicates to us that there was a vast scale of power involved in their death. In addition, we see sea creatures buried with dinosaurs. We see clams, we see shark teeth, we see fish fossils, garfish scales. Well, what would we expect to see in the fossils if there was some kind of catastrophe that mixed sea with land, that brought ocean water up onto land or something like that? We might expect to see some ocean creatures, some estuary creatures mixed with swamp creatures, lowland areas. And that's exactly what we find in these dinosaur rock layers.
If you've ever been in the ocean, you know how you rise and fall with the waves. 1 second, your feet touch the bottom, and then a wave pulls you up. As you wade further out, you walk on your tiptoes until it becomes too deep, and then you have no choice but to swim. That's exactly what some dinosaur tracks show.
In many cases, the water levels were lapping up onto there, leaving fresh sediment, but not enough to wipe out the dinosaurs or kill the dinosaurs or bury the dinosaurs, just enough so they could leave a lot of footprints.
And so they're in shallow water, then the water gets deeper and deeper, and as the water rises, they're making claw marks, and then as the water lowers, they make deeper impressions and footprints. That's weird. How do you get that much water up on land, and then how do you get the water to flow and to rise and lower, and then how do you get these deposits to come in and lay down sand, lay down sediment, and in such a way that it's not too fast to tear up where they had just stepped, but it's fast enough to bring in sediment and deposit it right on their footprints to preserve them.
A couple other observations about the dinosaurs fit this global flood scenario. One is that when we first encounter the dinosaurs, let's say we're going through the layers of rock in the earth and looking for fossils, we don't find dinosaurs at the very oldest rocks. There's a certain point at which we find the first evidence of dinosaurs. Interestingly enough, when we find them, we find footprints. We don't find the bones, we don't find the bodies, we find footprints. Forensic pathology comes in. Why do we have footprints, not bodies? The flood makes a very nice explanation.
After the flood, it took months for the water to recede enough for Noah and his passengers to set down on dry land and begin fulfilling God's command to replenish the earth. Humans are still around, but dinosaurs didn't make it. What went wrong?
After the flood, when the dinosaurs embarked from Noah's Ark, and there was probably at least 60 or so pairs of dinosaurs that were brought on the Ark, these dinosaurs went off and had to reestablish their eggs and their nesting sites and reproduce like God instructed all the animals and the humans to do. But it appears dinosaurs did go extinct in the thousands of years after the flood.
So what happened to the dinosaurs that survived the flood and left the ark? Well, they likely had clashes with humans, went through climate changes as extreme as the Ice Age, and had their habitats greatly reduced after the flood.
The post-flood world also started to go through a period of stabilization and kind of getting us to the point where we are today, where there's no longer an ice age. The ice had melted back across the northern continents in North America and in Asia. And so things started to stabilize after the flood and to kind of get into this routine that we have today. Deserts formed in the Sahara. All these different environments started to work themselves out. Unfortunately, the dinosaurs don't appear to be one of those types of animals that were able to thrive after the flood.
So humans probably contributed to that, probably a great deal, but it was probably a gradual process. There's good reason to think that dinosaurs were alive for many years, many centuries after the flood, and there's even evidence that some of them may have survived even into the Middle Ages and beyond.
Each passing year brings exciting new finds about these fascinating creatures. But with each new discovery comes new questions. And the answers seem to come from the same place, the Bible. Recently, paleontologists have found blood cells, soft tissues, and remnants of dinosaur proteins. Now, these things should not have survived millions of years encased in rock. But that's another story for next time. The world was once filled with mysterious creatures. But how long ago? Did the great dinosaurs live and die tens of millions of years before man? Will we find our answers in science? What can the Bible tell us? In this series, we'll look to both science and the Bible to help bring dinosaurs back to life, and to find answers to the questions they have left us. Uncovering the truth about dinosaurs. The hard truth. I'm Marcus Lloyd, and in this series, we're trying to shine some light on the controversy of whether dinosaurs evolved or were created, as the Bible teaches. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. The majesty of God's creation is everywhere. I mean, just take a look around. The evidence for a master designer, a creator, is right in front of our eyes. Some scientists try to understand how the world works, not just to get an increase in knowledge, but to know God better. The 16th century philosopher Sir Francis Bacon is often called the father of the scientific method, which is the search for knowledge through observation and experimentation. Now, he wrote that there are two books laid before us to prevent our falling into error. First, the volume of the scriptures, which reveal the will of God. Then the volume of the creatures, which express his power. Today, creation scientists have the same goal: to understand the unseen. And to do that, they use the scientific method.
Not only is the scientific method founded on biblical creation, but as a matter of historical fact, most of the founding fathers of science were Christians and, in fact, biblical creationists. In fact, the scientific method itself stems from Christian thinking. Bacon and others who expected to find patterns in the universe because there was a creator who'd imposed patterns on the universe.
In the scientific method, you're trying to explain some phenomenon in nature And so what you do is you come up with a guess or a hypothesis to explain the phenomenon that you're observing, and then you deduce some logical consequences that ought to hold if your guess is right. And then you observe to see if those consequences are observed. If they're not, you either abandon the hypothesis or you go back and modify it, and then you repeat the process. And so in this iterative process, you hopefully are going to converge on the correct explanation for what you're observing.
To understand how God upholds the universe is to understand something about the mind of God. And that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. Kepler, for example, said that doing astronomy was like thinking God's thoughts after him. And I think that's a wonderful sentiment. And so I would encourage anyone watching this who is wondering, can I really be a scientist and also embrace the Christian worldview? I would say in order to be consistent, you must. It's the Christian worldview that makes science possible.
Open my eyes, that I may see wondrous things from your law. Do secular scientists truly view the world with open eyes? What exactly do they believe? And how does it affect their perceptions? Evolutionary theory says our planet is billions of years old. Its hypothesis is that life evolves from simple organisms to complex forms over long periods. Single-cell organisms evolve into marine invertebrates that become fish, that become amphibians and reptiles and dinosaurs, then birds and mammals, and finally, humans.
You have to assume a starting point, and they assume great age. And so many of the methods are built in the assumption of millions and millions of years, and therefore they get millions and millions of years for an answer. But the ages themselves were not part of the rocks. The rocks themselves do not show either evolution or an age. That's all been inferred by the uniformitarian secular geologists who are trying to push God out of the picture.
Just as creation scientists approach science from a biblical standpoint, secular scientists believe that nature has the power to create. See, all of this, they say, everything around us came into being from some initial accident. Through repeated trial and error as nature gradually perfected the world around us. It's kind of a depressing thought. Evolutionists believe that we came into being by chance, we live without purpose, and we die without meaning. But if you take the Bible literally, you find hope. And you realize that God has a purpose for you. So which was it? Did we evolve, or was everything created?
The problem for evolutionists is that the fossils don't show evolution. If evolution were true, there ought to be thousands upon thousands of these transitional forms where one kind of animal is morphing into another kind, and we just don't see that. They have what they claim are a handful of transitional forms, but they can't even agree among themselves whether or not those are true intermediates between one kind of animal and another.
What we're finding more and more is, both in geology and in biology, we're finding that evolution does not provide a satisfactory explanation for the data that we see. It seems to me clear that we are not the product of evolution, and we have not been here for millions of years.
One characteristic of the fossil record of dinosaurs, which is nicely explained by the flood, is the abrupt appearance of communities. If we start low in the fossil record in the stack of rocks, and we work our way up looking for dinosaurs, let's say, we won't find them in the oldest rocks. There's a certain point, though, where we run into the dinosaurs for the first time. When we do, we don't just run into one type of dinosaur, we run into a variety of dinosaurs. But not just dinosaurs. We have the entire ecosystem, as if there was a whole living community of dinosaurs and the things that lived with them. That was apparently picked up and carried and dumped, again, spread across continents. And what you find when you look at that is we find the community suddenly appearing, the whole bunch of them. No transition from anything below them. No previous dinosaurs that look similar to it that might have given rise to them. And the sudden appearance of them can be explained in the fossil record by a flood.
Well, when it comes to using the fossils to date the sedimentary rock units, we have to keep in mind that there are two competing worldviews. One worldview, the secular evolutionary worldview, says that the fossil record, these sedimentary rock units, were laid down over hundreds of millions of years. Evolutionists, unfortunately, have to engage in what is called a tautology, or circular reasoning, saying that the layers of the sediments are dated by the fossils, but the fossils, in turn, are dated by the sediments that they're found in. This is circular reasoning.
Can the layers that we see today really have gotten there so quickly? Let's take a look back to a day in May 1980.
Well, in 1980, when Mount St. Helens erupted for the first time in recent years, geologists learned a lot. They actually had to go back and reassess things and go, well, wait a minute here. We thought it took thousands of years to get a few feet of sediment, and we're now seeing overnight, within a day or a week, we're seeing tens of feet of sediment being deposited. So Mount St. Helens really kind of changed the thinking of even the secular geologists, where now they recognize catastrophic events actually are the cause of much of the rock record we see. And that fits perfectly with the creation geologists who believe the global flood left most of the sediments we see, most of the fossils we see, exactly what we've been saying all along. As catastrophists, the flood is that catastrophe that gives us that global record of all these animals, all simultaneously at the same time all around the world.
So when I am looking at the fossil record and I find evidences in the fossil record that seem to indicate rapid deposition, I can incorporate those into my model and they fit very well. And a secular scientist would have to either discount them or ignore them or come up with some fanciful explanation to bring them in.
So Mount St. Helens showed that an enormous amount of geological work can be done in a very short time.
The slide is coming off of the west wall.
And we also saw a lot of geological activity after the initial eruption. For instance, because of the debris and the mud from the initial eruption, you had this mud flow that carved out a miniature Grand Canyon within a single day. So based on the training that an evolutionist received, if you were to blindfold him, spin him around, and put him in that canyon, based on his uniformitarian assumptions, he would assume that canyon required many years to form, but instead it was formed in a single day. And so this is relevant because it shows us that you can get these layers to form very rapidly. You don't need millions of years.
Secular scientists tell us that birds are descendants of dinosaurs. But there are flaws with that theory. I'll let the experts explain.
Part of this evolutionary story asserts that dinosaurs evolved into birds. But there are indications in the fossils that this story doesn't add up. For example, we have fully formed birds found buried right alongside dinosaurs.
Well, when it comes to the supposed evolution of birds from dinosaurs, I'm always thinking about, for example, the heavy-tailed theropod dinosaurs that evolutionists say birds came from, evolving into the tiny bee hummingbird of Cuba, which can successfully make its nest in a hollowed-out golf ball. The bee hummingbird of Cuba, evolving from a heavy-tailed theropod dinosaur, I just can't buy it from a zoological perspective.
You know, dinosaurs are used more than just about any other topic to really inundate people with evolutionary thinking. And that's a shame, because when you understand the truth about dinosaurs, it confirms the biblical worldview. But evolutionists, what they do is they take these wonderful creatures that the Lord made for our enjoyment and for our fascination, and they attach a story to these things. And people often will swallow the story without thinking, you know, wait a minute, is there really evidence for that story that dinosaurs lived millions of years ago and they had this nature and some of them turned into birds and so on? Well, no, that story should be rejected. It's not based in fact, it's not based in evidence. The Christian worldview can account for dinosaurs. We can make sense of that. We can make sense of the fact that they lived at the same time as people and so on. And it matters because people are being turned away from the Christian worldview because of these false ideas about dinosaurs. We can use the truth about dinosaurs to show people that the Bible really is true from the very beginning. Dinosaurs are a wonderful and exciting way to do that.
Another big issue with evolution is the problem of determining dates. Evolutionists believe dinosaurs to be millions of years old. But where did they come up with these dates? Many people seem to think that carbon dating establishes dinosaur ages, but actually it doesn't. Secular scientists do not use radiocarbon dating for dinosaur fossils, but radiocarbon dating does have its place.
Carbon dating is a age estimate technique typically used in archaeological samples. So like ancient bone or an ancient wooden axe, but you use bone or wood or charcoal or something where you had some kind of organic component. And because it only gives ages, supposedly, for the last several tens of thousands of years, we only use archaeological samples. So carbon dating, it does work in some contexts. It gives us accurate dates for the last 2,000 or 3,000 years, but that's where we can verify it with parallel dating techniques, like there's a buried coin and we have a depiction of a king on the coin, and we can match the king's inscription or depiction with ancient records. And then when the carbon date for a piece of material in that same archaeological layer matches, then we say, the carbon date is working, carbon dating is working. But the older you get, the lower you get in these layers, the farther carbon dates veer off of actual calendar ages. Until the lowest layers, you're looking at calendar ages that completely mismatch the carbon dates.
So in theory, it seems to make sense. But the accuracy of all radioactive dating techniques are suspect. Everybody kind of goes along with it, and they teach it as fact, but it's all based on assumptions that can't be verified.
Even though secular scientists do not use radiocarbon dating to establish dinosaur ages, creation researchers have discovered radiocarbon in dinosaur and other fossil creatures, indicating ages of thousands, not millions of years. If dinosaurs were around today, we could dissect one and see what's inside. Like mud and straw are mixed together to make bricks, hard and soft tissue are mixed together in bones. The hard part of the bone, the mud part of the brick, would likely be made of a highly organized form of calcium phosphate, like in a cow's bone, or like in our bones for that matter. The soft part, the straw part of the brick, would be mostly made of collagen, a long and tough protein. Bone cells, or osteocytes, manufacture both hard and soft parts of the bone. Fossils are often mineralized. These fossilized dinosaur bones are essentially rocks that used to be dinosaurs. In a secular view, they died millions of years ago. But here's a story of a lab accident and a broken T-Rex leg bone that gave up some amazing secrets.
Starting in 2005, the paleontological community was really rocked by a discovery made by Mary Schweitzer and her colleagues, who had been excavating a Tyrannosaurus rex fossil in Montana, in the Hell Creek Formation. When Schweitzer took the bones back to her lab in North Carolina, her assistant was dissolving some of the minerals away, but accidentally left it overnight. And when he came back, the bones were completely dissolved away. But instead of there being nothing left, which is what was expected, there were still some structures left inside that weren't mineral structures. They looked like the veins and the arteries of what was inside the bone. But that didn't seem to make any sense, because the bone is supposed to be 70 million years, 68 million years old for the Tyrannosaurus rex, and yet it had these materials in it.
And it should have been all gone. It should be all turned into nitrogen. We also have proteins, original proteins from these animals.
A protein has a finite life. These proteins and DNA and other biomolecules that we were finding in these bones cannot possibly, by any methods that we can apply today, survive for millions of years.
So Schweitzer has faced a lot of criticism from that, but Schweitzer came back and went back to the lab. They used independent labs, 3 of them, and kept going after this and looking at everything. And what they discovered was not only in the T-Rex were there blood vessels and probable blood cells, but there were also cells that produced the bone itself.
So when we find these molecules, and they're being found more and more commonly associated with dinosaur bones and other kinds of fossil remains, this is an indication that the radiometric dating methods are not giving us actual time. They're giving us something else.
This is a great bit of evidence that points towards a young Earth, that these fossils are not millions of years old, but were buried only a few thousands of years ago, catastrophically during Noah's flood.
The discovery of soft tissues in dinosaur fossils sparked a revolution in paleontology. Secular scientists still struggle with how it can be found in bones that are supposed to be so old. Critics say that creation scientists are blinded by their religion, but maybe it's the other way around. In Ephesians 4:17 through 18, the Bible says, "You should not walk as the unbelievers walk, in the futility of their mind, having their understanding darkened, being alienated from the life of God, because of the ignorance that is in them, because of the blindness of their heart." Could it be that evolutionists don't want to let God in the conversation? That they refuse to allow a divine foot in the door, as biologist Richard C. Lewontin said? Are they worried that it might start, well, a flood? Can you imagine what would happen to 150 years of evolutionary theory if scientists took a second look at the biblical perspective? Bible scoffers should be worried. As we've seen over and over again, science confirms the accuracy of the Bible.
Part of this evolutionary story asserts that dinosaurs evolved into birds, but there are indications in the fossils that this story doesn't add up.
Based on his uniformitarian assumptions, he would assume that canyon required many years to form, but instead it was formed in a single day.
This is a great bit of evidence that points towards a young Earth, that these fossils are not millions of years old, but were buried only a few thousands of years ago, catastrophically during Noah's flood.
We see flood sediments pushed way up into these mountains. Tremendous upheaval was going on in the earth.
As a matter of fact, when we look at the fossil record, we find that dinosaurs have always been dinosaurs.
So what you're looking at are layers of rock that correspond to pages in a book. Read each page, starting at the bottom, moving to the top. You're reading through time, reading about the history of the earth through time. Unlike books, not all the pages in this book of the earth are there.
We can use the truth about dinosaurs to show people that the Bible really is true from the very beginning. Dinosaurs are a wonderful and exciting way to do that.
There's more fun to be had as we go out and crack some more rocks and find some more fossils.
So we began this series talking about dinosaurs and what the fossil record tells us about these fascinating creatures. We described the fossil record as a book with missing pages. We can learn from it, but there are still mysteries to be uncovered. Where can we go? We have a book we can go to for answers. And unlike the fossil record, it's not missing any pages. The record is complete, and every word is true. As the Bible says in Psalm 119, 160, "The entirety of your word is truth, and every one of your righteous judgments endures forever." We can trust God's word in matters of faith, matters of history, matters of science. We can understand how science uncovers the truth about dinosaurs and confirms the accuracy of the Bible. In Colossians 1:16, the Bible tells us, "For by him all things were created, that are in heaven and that are on earth, visible and invisible. All things were created through him and for him." We can trust the Bible from beginning to end because it was written by the very one who created the dinosaurs, the planet they roamed, and the humans who walked the earth at the very same time. The more we learn about this book and the truths that it reveals, the more we see the glory and majesty of the Creator who was there at the very beginning.
All right. So, like I said, I had about 6 different videos that I could have shown. And I kept trying to figure out, okay, which one tells what I need to get done in one setting. And to do that, one of the videos that I really thought about showing was, where did he go? Well, it's up here. Oh, yeah, here it is. This one's called The Truth of the Genesis Flood, which is kind of similar to the first one. And then the other one is called Paleontological Paradox, Dinosaur Soft Tissue. If I'd have shown both of these, it would have been about twice as long as what we saw today. But this one on the dinosaur soft tissue is actually an interview with Kevin Anderson, who's the guy who did the thing with the Triceratops horn, who actually found it, and then they did the work on it. And like I said, the only reason that I hated not to show that one is because there's actually one scene where they've got material under a microscope, and he's got two sets of tweezers, and he's pulling it, and it's snapping back like a rubber band. It's that flexible, and I would love to have shown that. So what that says is, and this is all coming from different ministries and different groups, whether it's CRS, ICR, Answers in Genesis, Creation Ministries International, who will be having a speaker in April. And one of his talks is actually going to be on the dinosaurs. So he'll be talking, I'm sure, about some of the soft tissue stuff as well, and maybe even some of the updates. The iDino project that you see that magazine's an update on, as soon as they wrapped up iDino Part 1, they started iDino 2. And what they're trying to do there is the evolutionary community has tried to come up with ways that you can preserve blood vessels and soft tissue for millions and millions of years. And they've proposed some theories. The problem with all of the theories, regardless, is that they do not represent in any way anything like you would find in a real-world environment. You might make it work in a lab and stretch out the time, not to millions of years, but stretch it out a lot longer than normal. But you would never find those conditions in a real-world situation. And so iDino 2 is basically taking a look at all of these different proposed evolutionary scenarios and showing and doing the science to show, no, it's not going to work, and this is why. So they're actually doing that right now as well. So, like I said, the whole purpose of showing this tonight, like I said, we don't have archaeological records from the time of the flood back. But what we do have is the record of the rocks themselves, between how they're laid down and the information that we can find there, and then also with the fossils that we find there. Not only do we not see millions of years, but now within the fossils themselves, we're actually seeing that it couldn't be more than thousands of years, which fits exactly with the biblical timeline. And so you're talking about 4,500 years. And so we don't have written records, and well, we got the Bible as a written record, but not outside of that. We don't have archaeological records, but we've sure got a lot of geological stuff to kind of back that up. Now, like I said, next time we'll talk about some of the historical records. I'll let you hear some of the, like I said, what you would expect is if there was a great flood that destroyed civilization, and then a few hundred years after that, you have the Tower of Babel event where people disperse across the earth. What you would expect is that they would take those stories from what happened before, even up to the time of the tower, with them. You would also expect, like you would with a telephone game or something else, that those records will kind of morph and change over time, and some would get really, really outlandish, and some would be just kind of odd at how similar they are. Like I said, if you look at the Polynesian, Hawaiian area's version of the flood story, the main character's name is Nu'u. And this was before missionaries ever got to Hawaii. And they're telling about a flood story where a man hollowed out a giant log and turned it into a giant canoe, and he and some of his family and some of the animals got on this canoe and survived a great flood. And his name was Nu'u. You go to Greece and you read about Deucalion. You go to the Middle East, in and around Babylon and Iraq and Iran, and you read about, help me, Aaron, the Enuma Elish. Is that the flood? Yeah, the Gilgamesh epic. There we go. And he just had to write a bunch of papers on stuff like that. That's why I'm pulling off of him. But even then, you go back and you look at the Enuma Elish, and which is another record, and there you're reading about creation. And there's light and darkness and water being across the deep and all of these kind of things. And then you go to China and you start reading about, through this one people called the Miao people, that because their whole culture is around the birth and death of people in the village. And so every time a baby is born or every time a person dies, they go through the early history of their people and they sing it as a song. And you can get down to the detail of maybe something close to what Noah's wife's name looked like because of the stories that they tell in these songs. Because it talks about Babel, it talks about creation, it talks about the flood, it talks about why the flood. Deucalion, the Greek Deucalion, specifically said that the gods got angry because of how mean they were and how violent that they were, and that's why they sent the judgment of the flood, which sounds an awful lot like what you read in Genesis chapter number 6. And so we'll talk about all of those, and then we'll talk about the dinosaurs just a little bit more at the end, and I'll show you a video there to kind of help you see, because Noah did take dinosaurs on the ark. Because he said he took everything that breathed there, representatives of everything that breathed there, and dinosaurs breathed there. So they were on there, and they came off, and like they said in the one video, they didn't survive, and they went extinct for the most part, as far as we know. They're all extinct. There may be a few places. There's a place in Papua New Guinea that I kind of wonder about, that there's not a flying something there because of the records that are there. But we've got historical records of people coming across what today we would call dinosaurs, but what they called then were dragons. And so I'll show you a video at the end of that one. It's another one of these 20-minute videos. It'll tell you about the dragon legends and how it ties to the dinosaurs and all of that kind of stuff. So again, we've got the records of the rocks and we've got historical records. And we'll talk about all of that next time. Comments or questions? Not only that, but not only, for those of you who couldn't hear, not only do the American Indians in many places, and the Mayans down in Central and South America, they had legends related to the flood. But the American Indians do. But there are petroglyphs, which is cave art, in the Midwest. One of them you'll see in the video next week of what, it's a drawing of a dinosaur that the Native American Indians drew on the side of a cliff. And there's another one in another part that looks exactly like a pterodactyl. Now, they don't show that one on the video. I've got it somewhere else. but they got all of these different things. And then, like I said, you go to Europe, and you got the legend of St. George and the dragon and artwork and things. And in China, that they would make these beautiful animals that are animals that you can recognize just by looking at the little pieces carved out of jade and precious, semi-precious stones and all this kind of stuff. And then sitting right next to it is a Triceratops. Or you go to a temple in Angkor Wat and you see a stegosaur carved into the side of a temple. And that kind of stuff. And tapestries in England that have dinosaurs in them. And in the Middle Americas, you've got, again, wall art like hieroglyphs and those kind of things, but it's the Mayan peoples. And you can see, all these normal animals like jaguars and, and then all of a sudden you've got this thing that looks just like a dinosaur that we've uncovered in the fossil record. And how would they have known if they were, how would they have known to be that exact about what they were finding unless they had seen it? There's a tomb in England. This is my favorite one. There's a tomb in England. And this was in the 1500s. The guy, I think his last name was Bell. It's on the video next week, so you'll see it anyway. But he died, and they buried him in a church, inside of a church, on the floor. And all around his tomb are these brass etchings of, different scenes from nature and animals and all kinds of stuff. And there's two long-necked dinosaurs wrapped up like this fighting each other. And it's two different ones because one of them's got a club on the end of its tail with spikes sticking out of it, and the other's just a regular long tail. Now, if they hadn't seen that, number one, how would they have known to sketch them out on that thing anyway? But number two, how did they know to do this when they were fighting each other with their necks? There's an animal with a long neck today that when they fight each other, that's how they fight. They bat heads and they wrap their necks around each other. What is it? The giraffe. How would they have known that if somebody hadn't seen it? And so we'll see all of that next time at the end of the thing. Like I said, you have no idea how hard it is for me just to hush. I could go on about this stuff forever. Comments or questions? Yes, sir.
Many years ago, before I say this, I heard that they found a bell in a coal deposit,
Mm-hmm.
which would predate the flood. If the coal had been performed at the flood, at the time of the flood, from the wood being compressed.
Right. I'd like to see it, a bell. I mean,
Long before this.
right. Question it then. Right, right.
I keep thinking Pennsylvania, but I mean, we're talking back in the
Well, yeah.
70s and 80s. The other one is, the first one that I saw of this was Footsteps in Stone.
Yes.
You ever saw that? It's in Glen Rose, Texas.
Glen Rose, Texas.
Been there, done that.
Yeah.
I walked in those foot tracks.
Right.
In the dinosaur at the same level.
Yeah.
Now, I showed it to the teen group when I was youth, one of my first years as a team leader.
Right.
And one of the girls said, well, maybe it was thousands of years in between. I said, don't you think the rock would have hardened before the man who walked in there? I said, I didn't think about that.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what they're taught in school.
Right.
But when you got the two, and the man's tracks were the size of mine.
Yes. What he's talking about in Glen Rose, Texas, there are these footprints, like my little tri-toed job over here, but they're bigger. But alongside of those are human footprints in the same sedimentary rocks. And it goes back to that diagram they were showing what they called the dinosaur trackway, kind of up through Middle Texas. That's Glen Rose. That's what they're talking about. Up through Middle Texas, up through the mid-U.S., up into Canada. Well, this video, The Truth of the Great Genesis Flood, is unbelievably good. Tim Clary has done some of the best work. This was the conversation I told you about that I had with Woody when he was in the hospital, and he and I were having that big discussion about the Salk mega sequence, and the guy walked in, heard us talking, and then just turned around and left. This is Clary's work. That's what we were actually talking about. And you know, we got into this big discussion. But what he does in this video, and it's semi-technical, it's not bad, but you got to really pay attention to what he's talking about. But he's talking about how that during the flood there were basically 5 or 6 inundation events where the intensity would pick up and then it would recede for a while and it would pick back up and come further in. You know, you've been at the beach and you sit there at the beach and where you've got your chair, you're perfectly fine, and an hour later you're underwater. You know, it's that kind of a thing, but on a global flood scale. And he's actually taken geological data because he used to work in the oil industry. And he's taken the oil data, and the data collected by oil companies, and laid this thing out. And you can pretty much tell, based on what he's put together, the parts of the land that are still above land now that would have been considered high ground before the flood, the last bits of the land to be covered with that 15 cubits that it talks about there in Genesis 7, or Genesis 8, you can tell from the geology where some of that may have been. And that's what this video is all about. And I was watching this, and my jaw was hitting the floor every 2 or 3 seconds. I mean, this is a really good video. And it was done last year, and he's actually finished up. He had everything but Europe done at that point. And he was, I think, the last I saw in ICR's Answers, Acts and Facts, that he's finished Europe now and can pretty much lay out the entire globe. And it's just amazing stuff that we're finding. As John Morris, who used to head ICR, used to say, it's an amazing time, an exciting time to be a Christian. I mean, because you can see this stuff and it just blow your brains. I mean, it's just amazing. Somebody else? All right. Then I'm going to ask you to gather around, everybody that can and will. If a couple of you guys